The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Capitol building. Workers hurried through the halls, their footsteps echoing off the high ceilings. Today was different. Everyone could feel it in the air. Something big was about to happen. Pam Bondi walked through the corridor with steady steps. Her heels clicked against the polished stone floor. She carried a thick folder under her arm and wore a dark blue suit that made her look serious and ready for business. Moved out of her way as she passed. They knew who she was. They knew what she could do. Pam had been in politics for many years. She used to work as a lawyer who put criminals in jail. She was good at asking hard questions and finding the truth. If people lied to her, she could tell right away. Never back down from a fight, especially when she knew she was right. On the other side of the building, Jasmine Crockett was getting ready too. She sat in her office, looking over her notes one more time. Her desk was covered with papers and legal books. She had been working late every night this week. This hearing was important to her. She wanted to make a difference. Jasmine was younger than Pam. She had not been in Congress very long, but she had already made a name for herself. She spoke up for people who did not have a voice. She fought for civil rights and fair treatment for everyone. Some people said she was too loud, too angry. But Jasmine did not care what they said. She believed in what she was doing. The hearing room was starting to fill up. Robert Turner, the committee chairman, arrived early as always. He was an older man with gray hair who had seen many fights in Congress. He hoped today would go smoothly, but he had a feeling it would not. He had heard the rumors about the tension between Pam and Jasmine. Linda Martinez set up her camera in the press section. She had been covering Congress for 15 years. She knew when something big was coming. The way people were talking, the way they were looking at each other, it all pointed to drama. She made sure her camera had enough battery. She had a feeling she would need it. Outside the Capitol building, protesters were gathering. Some held signs supporting Jasmine and her fight for civil rights. Others carried banners backing Pam and her tough stance on law and order. The police watched carefully as the crowd grew bigger. They hoped things would stay peaceful. Kevin Brooks stood in the hallway checking his phone. He was a political advisor who worked with many different politicians. He had friends on both sides of today's fight. He knew this hearing could change careers. It could make someone famous or destroy their reputation. Politics was a dangerous game. Inside the hearing room, the seats were filling up fast. Frank Davis and Mary Johnson, two other committee members, took their places at the long wooden table. They both looked nervous. They knew they might have to pick sides today. Politics, staying neutral was not always possible. The public gallery was packed. People had come from all over the country to watch. Some were activists who followed Jasmine's work. Others were lawyers who respected Pam's experience. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when these two strong women faced each other. Susan White found her seat in the press area. She wrote for a major newspaper and had covered both women before. She knew their backgrounds, their styles, their weaknesses. Pam was careful and precise, like a surgeon with a knife. Jasmine was passionate and direct, like a storm that could not be stopped. The topic of today's hearing was judicial nominations. The president had chosen several new judges, and Congress had to approve them. But this was about more than just judges. It was about power, about the future of the country, about who would have a say in important decisions. Pam believed the judges should follow the law exactly as it was written. She thought judges should not make new laws from the bench. They should interpret what already existed. This was how she had always worked as a prosecutor. The law was the law. Jasmine thought differently. She believed judges should consider how their decisions affected real people. Laws could be unfair sometimes. Good judges should protect those who could not protect themselves. This was why she became a lawyer in the first place. Jake Miller adjusted his camera lens from the photographer's section. He had taken pictures at many congressional hearings, but today felt special. The room was more crowded than usual. The air seemed thicker. Even the security guards looked more alert. Carl Thompson, another committee member, reviewed his notes one last time. Known for trying to keep peace during heated discussions, but he wondered if he would be able to control what was coming. Both Pam and Jasmine were strong personalities who did not give up easily. The clock on the wall showed it was almost time to start. Staff members made final preparations. Water glasses were filled, microphones were tested, name cards were straightened. Everything had to be perfect for the cameras that would broadcast his hearing across the nation. Pam entered the hearing room first. She walked to her seat with confidence. She placed her folder on the table and looked around the room. She saw the reporters, the protesters in the gallery, the other committee members. She was ready for whatever came next. A few minutes later, Jasmine walked in. The room seemed to change when she entered. Some people sat up straighter. Others whispered to their neighbors. She moved to her seat across from Pam. For a moment, the two women looked at each other. Neither smiled. Chairman Turner called for order. The room grew quiet. The hearing was about to begin. No one knew exactly what would happen, but everyone could feel that this would be a day to remember. The battle lines were drawn. The cameras were rolling. History was about to be made in this small room in the heart of American democracy. Chairman Turner banged his gavel 3 times. The sound echoed through the packed hearing room. Everyone fell silent. He cleared his throat and spoke into his microphone. His voice was calm, but firm. He knew this hearing could get out of hand quickly. The first few questions were routine. Other committee members asked about simple things like court schedules and administrative matters. The nominated judges answered politely. Everything seemed normal. But everyone in the room could feel the tension building like a storm cloud gathering. Strength. Pam sat quietly during the early questions. She made notes on a yellow pad. Her pen moved smoothly across the paper. She was preparing for her turn. She had done this many times before. She knew how to wait for the right moment to strike. Jasmine also waited her turn. But she was not as calm as Pam. Her foot tapped under the table. She shifted in her chair. She had so much she wanted to say. The issues they were discussing today mattered to her deeply. They affected real people in her district. Linda Martinez zoomed her camera in on both women. She could see the difference in their body language. Pam looked like a cat waiting to pounce. Jasmine looked like a runner waiting for the starting gun. Both were ready for action. The first real fireworks started when Frank Davis asked about voting rights. One of the nominated judges had written opinions that made it harder for some people to vote. Jasmine's eyes lit up when she heard this question. This was her territory. When her turn came, Jasmine leaned forward into her microphone. Her voice was strong and clear. She asked the judge why he thought it was okay to make voting harder for poor people. She asked why he supported laws that closed polling places in certain neighborhoods. The judge tried to give a careful answer. He spoke about legal precedent and constitutional interpretation, but Jasmine was not satisfied. She pressed harder. She asked specific questions about specific cases. Her voice grew louder with each question. Pam watched this exchange carefully. She saw how Jasmine was attacking the judge. She saw how the judge was struggling to answer. She made more notes on her pad. She was building her strategy. Susan White typed quickly on her laptop. She could see this was turning into exactly the kind of confrontation everyone had expected. Jasmine was playing her usual role as the passionate advocate. Soon Pam would respond with her prosecutorial precision. The public gallery was getting restless. Supporters of both women were sitting forward in their seats. Some whispered to each other. Others shook their heads in disagreement. The security guards watched them carefully. Jasmine continued her questioning. She brought up cases where voting rights had been denied. She talked about elderly people who could not get to polling places. She mentioned young people who were turned away because of new ID requirements. Her voice carried real emotion. The judge kept trying to explain his legal reasoning, but Jasmine cut him off several times. She said his explanations were just excuses. She said he was hiding behind legal language to avoid admitting he was wrong. Chairman Turner warned Jasmine to let the witness finish his answers. But Jasmine barely slowed down. She was in full attack mode now. This was what she was known for. This was why her supporters loved her and her opponents feared her. Kevin Brooks watched from the back of the room. He could see this was going exactly as he had predicted. Jasmine was being herself, passionate, direct, uncompromising. This would fire up her base, but might alienate moderate voters. Politics was always a balancing act. Mary Johnson looked uncomfortable. At the committee table, she did not like confrontation. She preferred when hearings were polite and orderly, but she knew this was just the beginning. When Pam got her turn, things would really heat up. Jake Miller's camera flashed as he captured the intensity on Jasmine's face. This was the kind of moment that could define a political career. These photos might be in history books someday. After 20 minutes of intense questioning, Jasmine finally finished. She sat back in her chair, breathing hard. She had said everything. She wanted to say she had made her point. Now it was time for others to respond. The room fell quiet for a moment. Everyone knew what was coming next. It was Pam's turn to ask questions. She had been watching Jasmine's performance carefully. She had been taking notes. She was ready. Pam stood up slowly. She smoothed her jacket and walked to the microphone. Unlike Jasmine, she did not seem emotional or excited. She looked calm and professional, but there was something dangerous in her eyes. She began speaking in a quiet, controlled voice. She thanked the chairman for the opportunity to question the witnesses. She said she appreciated the previous speaker's passion, but then her tone changed slightly. Pam said she had some concerns about the claims that had been made. She said she wanted to clarify some facts. She opened her thick folder and pulled out several documents. She arranged them neatly on the table. In front of her, Carl Thompson could see where this was heading. Pam was setting a trap. She was about to challenge everything Jasmine had said. He hoped the chairman would be able to keep control of the situation. Pam looked directly at Jasmine for the first time since the hearing began. Their eyes met across the table. Neither woman blinked. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The reporters in the press section stopped typing. The spectators in the gallery held their breath. Even the security guards seemed to lean forward slightly. Everyone knew they were about to witness something significant. Pam smiled slightly. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a prosecutor who had just found a weakness in the defense case. She picked up her first document and began to read from it. The battle was about to begin in earnest. The polite phase of the hearing was over. Now it was time for the real confrontation that everyone had come to see. The clash between two strong women with very different views of how America should work. The camera lights seemed brighter. The room seemed smaller. History was about to unfold in real time, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something they would never forget. Pam held the document in her hands like a weapon. She looked down at it, then back at Jasmine. The room was so quiet that people could hear the air conditioning humming. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. She began speaking in a calm, steady voice. She said she had listened carefully to the previous speaker's concerns about voting rights. She said these were important issues that deserved accurate information. Then she paused and looked directly at Jasmine. Pam said she had some documents that might help clarify the facts. She held up a court filing from a case Jasmine had mentioned. She read from it slowly and clearly. The document said something very different from what Jasmine had claimed just minutes before. Jasmine's face changed. Her confident expression began to fade. She reached for her own papers, shuffling through them quickly. She was looking for something to contradict what Pam had just read, but she could not find it. Linda Martinez zoomed her camera in closer. She could see the sweat forming on Jasmine's forehead. This was not going the way Jasmine had planned. Pam had done her homework better than anyone expected. Pam continued reading from the document. Each sentence she spoke seemed to tear down another part of Jasmine's argument. The case Jasmine had described as an example of voter suppression was actually about preventing fraud. The judge had ruled to protect elections, not to hurt voters. The public gallery began to murmur. Jasmine's supporters looked confused and worried. They had believed everything she said about the case. Now they were hearing a completely different story. Some of them started whispering to each other. Susan White typed furiously on her laptop. This was the kind of moment that made careers and destroyed them. Pam was systematically dismantling Jasmine's credibility in front of a national audience. It was brutal, but effective. Jasmine tried to interrupt. She said the document Pam was reading was taken out of context. She said there were other parts of the case that supported her position. But Pam was ready for this too. Pam pulled out another document. This one was a legal brief that Jasmine herself had filed in a similar case. She began reading from it. Jasmine's own words seemed to contradict what she had said during her questioning. The inconsistency was clear to everyone in the room. Chairman Turner looked uncomfortable. He had hoped to avoid this kind of direct confrontation between committee members, but it was too late to stop it now. The two women were locked in combat, and neither would back down. Frank Davis and Mary Johnson exchanged worried glances. They had never seen anything like this before. Usually committee members disagreed politely. They did not attack each other so directly. This was personal now. Jasmine's voice rose as she tried to defend herself. She said Pam was playing games with legal language. She said ordinary people did not care about technical details. They cared about results, cared about whether they could vote or not. But Pam was not finished. She had more documents. She pulled out a news article from Jasmine's home district. It described a voting lawsuit that Jasmine had supported. The article showed that the lawsuit had actually made it harder for people to vote, not easier. The contradiction was devastating. Jasmine had spent 20 minutes attacking a judge for supposedly making voting harder, but her own actions had done exactly the same thing. The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. Carl Thompson watched in amazement. He had seen many political battles in his years in Congress, but he had never seen someone so thoroughly prepared to destroy an opponent's argument. Pam had turned this hearing into a courtroom, and she was the prosecutor. Kevin Brooks shook his head as he watched from the back of the room. This was a disaster for Jasmine. Her political brand was built on being a fighter for voting rights. But Pam was showing that Jasmine did not really understand the issues she claimed to champion. Jake Miller's camera captured every moment. The photos he was taking would be on the front page of newspapers tomorrow. They showed Jasmine looking confused and defensive, while Pam remained calm and in control. Pam pulled out yet another document. This one was from a legal database that tracked court decisions. It showed the real statistics about voting access in cases involving the nominated judge. The numbers were completely different from what Jasmine had claimed. Jasmine was now visibly flustered. She kept shuffling through her papers, looking for something to save her argument. But everything she found seemed to make things worse. Had built her case on incomplete information and political talking points rather than facts. The atmosphere in the room had completely changed. At the beginning of the hearing, Jasmine had seemed like the aggressive prosecutor going after corrupt judges. Now she looked like a defendant, caught in a lie by a skilled attorney. Pam's voice remained steady and professional throughout her presentation. She never raised her voice or showed emotion. Each piece of evidence made Jasmine's position weaker. The nominated judge, who Jasmine had attacked so harshly, began to look relieved. The woman who had accused him of being unfair to voters was being shown to be uninformed about the very cases she had cited against him. Susan White could hardly believe what she was witnessing. 15 years of covering Congress, she had never seen one member so completely demolish another member's argument. This was not just a political disagreement. This was an education in how to prepare for battle. Jasmine made one last desperate attempt to fight back. She stood up and pointed at Pam. She said Pam was using lawyer tricks to confuse people. Said the real issue was not legal technicalities, but basic fairness. But Pam was ready for this too. She calmly pointed out that Jasmine was also a lawyer. She said if Jasmine could not understand these legal issues, maybe she should not be questioning judges about them. The insult was delivered so smoothly that it took a moment for people to realize how harsh it was. The room fell silent again. Jasmine stood there with her mouth open, unable to respond. She had been completely outmaneuvered by someone who was simply better prepared and more knowledgeable than she was. Chairman Turner finally found his voice. He called for a short recess. Everyone needed time to process what had just happened. But the damage was done. In front of cameras and reporters, Jasmine had been exposed as someone who made bold claims without doing her homework. The confrontation was over, but its effects were just beginning. The hearing room buzzed with activity during the recess. People stood up and stretched their legs. Some talked in hushed voices about what they had just witnessed. Others checked their phones to see if the news was already spreading online. Jasmine sat alone at the committee table. Her face was red, and her hands shook slightly as she gathered her papers. She had never been embarrassed like this before, especially not in front of so many people. It felt like everyone in the room was staring at her. Her staff members rushed over to help her. They whispered in her ear, trying to figure out how to fix this disaster. One of them showed her a phone with social media already exploding with videos of the confrontation. The clips were spreading fast, and most of the comments were not kind to Jasmine. On the other side of the room, Pam remained calm. She organized her documents neatly and put them back in her folder. She had done exactly what she came to do. She had shown everyone that she was prepared and knowledgeable, while her opponent was not. Linda Martinez was already editing her footage on her laptop. She knew this would be the lead story on tonight's news. Confrontation had everything viewers wanted: drama, conflict, and a clear winner and loser. Her editor would love this material. Outside the hearing room, reporters gathered in small groups. They were all trying to make sense of what had happened. Most of them had expected Jasmine to dominate the hearing. She was known for her fierce questioning style. But Pam had turned the tables completely. Susan White called her newspaper's main office. She told her editor that this was bigger than anyone had expected. This was not just a political disagreement. It was a complete destruction of one politician's reputation by another. The story needed to go on the front page. Rachel Green stood in the hallway, giving interviews to other news outlets. She was a political expert who analyzed congressional hearings for television. She had never seen anything quite like this before. She told reporters that this could end. Jasmine's career is a serious political figure. The social media reaction was swift and brutal. Video clips of Pam presenting her evidence were being shared thousands of times. People were making jokes about Jasmine being caught unprepared. Memes were already appearing with her confused face from the hearing. Kevin Brooks watched the online reaction with professional interest. He had seen politicians recover from embarrassing moments before, but this was different. This was not just a bad day or a simple mistake. This showed that Jasmine did not understand the issues she claimed to care about most. Back in the hearing room, Chairman Turner was having an emergency meeting with his staff. They were trying to decide whether to continue the hearing or end it early. The confrontation had completely overshadowed the actual purpose of the meeting, which was to question the judicial nominees. Lisa Adams, one of Jasmine's closest allies in Congress, arrived at the Capitol as soon as she heard what happened. She found Jasmine in a private office, looking defeated and angry. Lisa tried to comfort her friend, but the damage was already done. The two women worked together to plan a response. They needed to find a way to spin this disaster into something positive. Maybe they could say that Pam had used dirty tricks, or that the whole thing was planned in advance. But they both knew it would be hard to make people forget what they had seen. Meanwhile, Pam was giving interviews to reporters in another part of the building. She remained professional and calm, just as she had during the hearing. She said she was simply doing her job as a committee member. She had an obligation to make sure accurate information was presented. When reporters asked if she had planned to embarrass Jasmine, Pam denied it. She said she had prepared for the hearing the same way she prepared for everything, by studying all the relevant facts and documents. If that made her colleague look bad, it was not her fault. Peter Clark, a veteran political reporter, pressed Pam harder in his interview. He asked if she thought Jasmine was qualified to serve on the committee. Pam gave a diplomatic answer, but her meaning was clear. She did not think Jasmine understood the issues well enough to be questioning federal judges. Nicole Brown, another reporter, asked Pam about the personal animosity between her and Jasmine. Pam insisted there was no personal conflict, she said. This was about competence and preparation, not personalities. But everyone could see that the two women genuinely disliked each other. The reaction from political leadership was swift. Members of Jasmine's own party began distancing themselves from her. They had seen the videos online and knew this was a political disaster. Some of them had never liked her aggressive style anyway. Gary Miller, a senior member of Jasmine's party, gave a carefully worded statement to reporters. He said that all committee members should come prepared to hearings. He did not defend Jasmine directly, which everyone understood as a criticism of her performance. Republican leaders, on the other hand, were celebrating Pam's performance. They saw it as proof that their party was more serious and better prepared than the opposition. They began planning to use video clips from the hearing in future campaign advertisements. The nominated judges, who had been forgotten during the drama, were relieved that attention had shifted away from them. The brutal questioning they had feared never materialized because the committee members ended up fighting each other instead. Amanda Taylor, polling expert, began conducting quick surveys to measure public reaction. Early results showed that most people who watched the hearing thought Pam had won the confrontation decisively. Even some Democrats admitted that Jasmine had looked unprepared. Steve Rogers, political commentator, appeared on several news shows. That evening, said this hearing would be remembered as a turning point. It showed that politicians could not get away with making bold claims without having facts to back them up. As the day ended, both women went home to very different situations. Pam was fielding congratulatory calls from supporters and political allies. Her staff was already planning how to use this moment to advance her career. Jasmine, on the other hand, faced a crisis. Her phone rang constantly with calls from angry donors and disappointed supporters. Her political future, which had seemed so bright just that morning, now looked very uncertain. The hearing that was supposed to be about judicial nominees had become about something much bigger. It had become a lesson in the importance of preparation, knowledge, and political skill. And everyone who watched knew they had witnessed a career-defining moment for both women involved. 3 weeks had passed since the hearing that changed everything. The videos were still being shared online, but the immediate shock had worn off. Now it was time to see what the long-term effects would be for both women and for American politics. Jasmine sat in her district office back home, staring out the window at the parking lot. The place that used to be packed with supporters and media was now mostly empty. Only a few loyal staff members remained. Even they seemed unsure about the future. Her poll numbers had dropped 20 points since the hearing. Local newspapers that used to praise her work were now questioning whether she was ready for national politics. Some were even suggesting she should focus on local issues. Instead of trying to make headlines in Washington, the phone calls from donors had mostly stopped. Political fundraising was all about confidence, and confidence in Jasmine had evaporated after her public humiliation. The people who used to write big checks were now looking for other candidates to support. Lisa Adams visited Jasmine every few days, trying to help her friend figure out a path forward. They discussed different strategies for rebuilding her reputation. Maybe she could take some law courses to improve her knowledge. Maybe she could work on smaller local issues for a while. But Jasmine was struggling with more than just political problems. She was dealing with personal doubt for the first time in her career. She had always believed she was fighting for the right causes. Now she wondered if she had been fooling herself about how much she really understood. Meanwhile, Pam's life had changed in the opposite direction. Her phone rang constantly with invitations to speak at events, appear on television shows, and meet with party leaders. She had become a national figure almost overnight. The Republican Party saw her as a rising star. She had shown that she could take on aggressive Democrats and beat them at their own game. Party fundraisers were already talking about supporting her for higher office, maybe governor or senator. Pam handled her new fame carefully. She knew that politics could change quickly. One day you were on top. The next day you could be forgotten. She continued to prepare thoroughly for every appearance and every interview. Amanda Taylor released her detailed polling results a month after the hearing. The numbers told a clear story. Most Americans thought Pam had won the confrontation fairly. They did not see it as a dirty trick or an unfair attack. They saw it as good preparation beating poor preparation. The poll also showed something interesting about how people viewed women in politics. Many voters said they respected politicians who did their homework regardless of whether they were male or female. But they had less patience for politicians who made dramatic claims without facts to back them up. Steve Rogers wrote a long analysis of the hearing for a major political magazine. He said it represented a new phase in American politics. Social media had made it impossible for politicians to hide their mistakes. Everything was recorded and shared instantly. He also noted that the hearing had changed how other politicians prepared for public appearances. Everyone was now spending more time studying facts and less time practicing dramatic speeches. Nobody wanted to be the next Jasmine. Daniel White, a historian who studied Congress, said the confrontation would be remembered for years. He compared it to other famous moments when one politician had completely outmaneuvered another. These moments often changed the balance of power in Washington. 6 months later, the effects were even clearer. Jasmine had decided not to run for re-election to Congress. She announced that she wanted to focus on community organizing and local activism. She said she had learned that she could make a bigger difference working outside of politics. Her decision surprised some people, but those close to her said it made sense. She had never fully recovered from the embarrassment of the hearing. Every time she tried to speak on national issues, someone would bring up the moment when Pam had made her look foolish. Pam, on the other hand, was being mentioned as a possible candidate for several higher offices. She had proven that she could handle pressure and that she knew how to prepare for important moments. These were exactly the qualities that party leaders looked for in potential candidates. The judicial nominees, who had been forgotten during the drama, were eventually confirmed. The actual purpose of the hearing had been accomplished, but nobody remembered their names. Everyone only remembered the fight between the two women. Carl Thompson, who had watched the whole confrontation unfold, reflected on what it meant for Congress as an institution. He worried that hearings were becoming more about political theater than about serious policy discussions. But he also thought that holding politicians accountable for their claims was important. The hearing room, where everything happened, looked the same as always. New hearings were held there regularly. But staff members still talked about the day when Pam had destroyed Jasmine's arguments. It had become part of the building's folklore. Linda Martinez won several journalism awards for her coverage of the hearing. Her video footage had been used by news outlets around the world. She had captured a moment that perfectly illustrated the importance of preparation and knowledge in politics. The broader lessons of the confrontation spread beyond Washington. Law schools began using it as an example of how to prepare for difficult questioning. Business schools talked about the importance of knowing your facts before making presentations. Young politicians who watched the videos learned to respect the power of thorough preparation. They saw what happened when someone tried to rely on passion and talking points instead of real knowledge. The hearing became required viewing in political training programs. As time passed, both women found their places in the new reality. Jasmine discovered that she could be effective as a community organizer without the pressure of national politics. She helped register voters and worked on local housing issues. The work was less glamorous but more satisfying. Pam continued to rise in national politics. She never forgot the lesson of that day, that success came from being better prepared than your opponents. She kept studying, kept learning, and kept proving that she belonged at the highest levels of government. The hearing that was supposed to be about judges had become about something much more important. It had shown that in American democracy, facts still mattered. Preparation still counted. Sometimes, the person who did their homework could change the course of political history. With just a few well-chosen documents and the courage to use them,